The sun over the Rolling Pines Country Club didn't feel like the kind of sun that warmed you. It felt like the kind of sun that watched you. It beat down on the back of Ilias's neck. In the distance, turning
the city
his
lights
sweat flickered
into a
on.
cold itch under his
Among
white
them,
caddy vest.
the green lights of the Apex trucks moved steadily through the streets. They were moving medicine to hospitals, food to families.
This bag
and
probably
hope to the
cost more than
neighborhoods
his
that had
mother's
been
car.
forgotten. And the clubs
The boy who was
inside
laughed
it
at
custom-made had become the man
polished
who
to
kept
a
the
mere
world
shine
moving.
were worth a year of his
And
tuition.
as the moon rose over the city,
He was 17.
the only
And his
sound
world
was
was
the quiet
measured
hum
in
of a
yards
system
and
that
wind
worked for
directions.
everyone, not just the
Standing.
few.
A
A
few
feet
feet
away
simple.
was Mr. Sterling,
Carved into the hearts of
Sterling
everyone who
didn't
worked
look
at
like
the
a man
warehouse.
who worked for a living.
Never judge a person
He
by
looked
the
like a
bag
man
they
who
carry,
owned the idea of work.
for you never know the world
He
they
was
are building
60 with
inside
hair
their
the
head.
color of a silver
Elias
coin,
had proven that
and a
the
face that
loudest
seemed
laugh
permanently set
doesn't
in a
win
look
the
of
race.
mild disappointment.
The steadiest heart
He was currently
does.
obsessing
10
over a
years had
small
passed
white
since
ball,
the day at the golf
as if it were the
course.
center of the universe.
And the name Apex Flow was
Wind's
no
picking
longer
up
just
from
a
the
company
east,
name.
sir.
Elias
It had
said
become a
softly.
symbol of a new way to live.
He didn't speak unless he was spoken
Elias
to,
was now
but a good
33
caddy
years
knew
old.
when to offer the truth.
He still didn't wear
The
gold
green slopes
watches or
more than
drive
it
flashy
looks.
cars.
Aim 3 inches
If
to
you
the
saw
left
him
of the
walking
cup.
down the street in his neighborhood,
Sterling didn't acknowledge him.
you'd think he was just another
grunted,
neighbor,
swung,
perhaps a teacher
and
or a
watched
local shop
as
owner.
the ball sliced
He liked
through
it
the
that
air.
way. Landing
He didn't
exactly
want to
where
be a
Elias had
monument.
suggested, he wanted to be a bridge.
Lucky guess, kid.
One
Sterling
morning,
muttered.
Elias decided
Handing
to go
the
for
putter
a drive.
back without looking,
He didn't go to the
they
Highways
walked
offices
toward the
or the
ninth
shipping
hole in
docks.
silence.
He drove back to the old public library where it had all started. He stood outside for a moment, looking at the
While the
brick
other
building.
caddies spent their breaks
It looked
scrolling
smaller
through their
than he
phones or
remembered.
complaining about the heat.
He walked
Elias
inside,
listened.
and the smell of
He
old
listened to
paper
the way
and
these
floor
men
wax
talked
hit
about
him like a
interest rates,
physical memory,
about shipping lanes.
He walked to the back
and about
corner,
the bottlenecks that kept them
to
up
the
at
very
night.
desk where he had spent those
Elias
long nights
wasn't just a
coding
kid
under the
carrying
flickering
bags.
lights.
He
A
was a
young
kid
girl,
with a notebook
maybe
in his
14,
pocket,
was
sitting
sitting
a library
now.
card that was worn
She had
thin
3
from
heavy
use.
books stacked next to
He
her.
spent
and was
his nights
typing
in a
furiously
small
on
apartment where the
tablet.
radiator hissed like a
Elias
wounded
stood
animal,
back,
teaching
watching
himself the
her.
logic of systems.
He saw the way her brow
He saw the
furrowed
world
in
as a series of
concentration.
connected pipes.
He saw the way she bit her lip
If
when
one
she hit
got
a snag
clogged,
in her logic.
the whole thing
It was like
backed
looking
up.
at a ghost of himself.
By the time they reached the 10th
syntax
tee,
for that loop
Sterling
is a bit
was joined
tricky.
by 2 other men
Elias
in
said
expensive
softly,
polos.
stepping closer.
They weren't
If you
talking
try to
about
nest the
golf
variables
anymore.
too deep,
They were talking
the memory
about the
will lag.
logistics nightmare.
The girl
It's the
looked
port
up
of
startled.
Savannah, Sterling
She
said,
didn't know who he
wiping his
was.
brow with a silk handkerchief.
To her, he was
We have
just a
40
guy in a plain
containers of
jacket.
electronics sitting on
I
the
know,
water, she said.
We can't get the
A
truck
bit of
scheduled
fire in her
because the
eyes.
software keeps.
But if I don't nest them,
flagging
I
the
can't get
loads
the
is
real-time
incomplete.
weather data to
It's
sync
costing
with
us
the transit
$50,000 a day.
I'm
in
trying to build a
standing
way
fees.
for the local food
My
pantry
engineers say it's a glitch
to
in
know when the
routing
grocery
algorithm.
store is about to throw
They've
out
been
milk
staring at it for a
so
week.
they can pick it up
The other men
before it
nodded,
spoils,
offering useless
Elias felt a
sympathies.
lump in his throat.
He
Elias
didn't
felt a
tell her
strange
his
hum
name.
in his chest.
He didn't
He
tell
knew that
her he
problem.
owned the company
He had
that
spent the
handled
last
30%
3 months
of the
reading
country's
open source
freight.
code for shipping
He just pulled
manifests
up a
because
chair.
he was bored and curious.
Show me your logic.
He
He knew
said.
exactly why the
The
software
next
was
2
flagging
hours,
those loads.
the millionaire
It
and the
wasn't a
student
glitch.
sat in the back of the library.
There was a conflict
working
between
through
the
lines
weight
of code
sensors. He
and
didn't
the
do the
regional
work for
holiday
her.
scheduling.
He asked her
His heart
questions
started
that
to
led her
hammer
to the answers.
against his ribs.
He watched
He
her
knew
face
he
light
should
up
stay
when the
quiet.
code finally ran
He was a
without an
teenager
error.
from the east side.
You're really
He
good
was
at
the
this,
help,
the girl said.
but the math in his
Packing
head
up her
was so
things as the
clear.
library
It was like a
began to
bright
close.
light he couldn't turn off.
Are you a teacher? As
I'm a
Sterling
student,
reached for
Elias
his
replied
driver,
with a smile.
Elias cleared his
Just
throat.
a bit further along in
It
the
was
book
a small
than you are.
sound, but in
As
the
he walked
quiet
out
of
of
the
the
library,
library,
he
sounded
saw
like
a familiar
gunshot,
car
sir.
parked at the curb.
Elias asked.
It was a modest
Sterling
sedan,
paused.
and inside
His club halfway
was
to the
Mr.
ground.
Sterling. He looked at Elias
Sterling
as if he
didn't
had just
drive a
noticed
limousine
a blade
anymore.
of grass was out of place.
Since
retiring, he had joined the board of Elias's
You need a
scholarship
water break?
foundation.
No,
He
sir,
spent his
Elias
days
said,
visiting
his
high
voice
schools,
steadier than he felt.
talking to kids about the
I was listening
mistakes
to
he
you
had
talk
made.
about the Savannah port issue.
You're late for the board meeting,
The containers,
Sterling
I
said,
think.
though there was no
I
edge in
think
his
your
voice.
engineers are looking at the wrong
He
end
sounded
of the
like a
code.
grandfather now,
The 2 other
mellowed
men
by
chuckled,
time,
and the realization
Sterling didn't
that
laugh
his old
yet.
life had been very lonely.
He just stared.
His
I
eyes
got caught up
narrowing.
in some important
You
research.
think you know
Elias
about
said.
global logistics, do
Climbing
you?
into the passenger
I
seat.
know that your software
They
is
drove
likely
through the
using
city
a
together.
standard Euclidean
They
algorithm
passed the
for
new
truck
community
routes,
center,
Elias
which
said,
was buzzing
stepping
with
forward
activity.
just an inch.
They passed
But it's
a
not
group of
accounting
young
for the
men and
bridge
women
height
in
restrictions that were
Apex Flow
updated last
platforms, laughing.
The software
as they
thinks the
walked
trucks
to
are too
lunch.
heavy for the route.
These were
so
the
it
people
marks the
who
load
used
as
to be
impossible.
invisible to men like Sterling.
If you just bypass the
Now,
bridge sensor,
they were
and
the
reroute through the
backbone
northern
of the local
gate,
economy.
the flag will drop.
Do you ever think about that
You
day?
could have those containers
Sterling
moving by
asked as
tonight.
they stopped at a red
Silence
light.
that followed was
The
heavy.
day I laughed.
A bird chirped
Elias
in a nearby
looked out
oak
the
tree.
window.
Then
Think about it
Sterling's
every time I
shoulders
see
began to
someone
shake.
look down on another
It started
person.
as a wheeze.
I think about
Then
how
it
much
turned
potential
into a
is lost in the
full-throated
world
roar
simply
of
because
laughter.
someone thinks they are
He
better
leaned
than
on his
someone
driver,
else.
clutching his side.
I used to
The
think
other
that
two
the
men
world
joined
was a
in,
ladder,
their laughter
Sterling said,
echoing
his
across
voice
the
quiet.
manicured lawn.
I thought you had to
Caddy.
step on people to get
Sterling
to the top.
gasped,
But you
pointing
showed
a
me that
finger
the
at
world is
Elias.
more like a web.
The
If you
caddy
pull
is going
too
to
hard
fix
on
a
one string,
multi-million
the whole
dollar
thing
shipping
breaks.
firm.
Did you hear that? You have to strengthen the whole web if you want it to hold anything of value. He's the next king of tech. They arrived at the community center for the board meeting. The room was filled with local leaders, nothing compared to the heat of the former caddies who were now logistics managers. He stood perfectly still. When Elias walked into the straps of the bag until his knuckles turned silent. They just nodded. Listen to me, Elias. During the meeting, they discussed the expansion of the Apex neighborhood grant. He stepped closer. They weren't just funding tech anymore, but the mockery still sharp in his eyes. Community gardens, you're a hard worker. Bakeries, and you've got a good eye for the wind. Elias listened more than he talked. This is a game for men who wanted the community to lead itself. You don't get to sit at the table just because you read a book. A man approached Elias. If you start thinking you're smarter than you are, tired eyes, you'll end up broke, a wide smile, and bitter. He was the manager of the very golf course where Elias used to work. Elias didn't say a word. Elias, the man said, shaking his hand. He didn't argue. I just simply picked up the bag and walked. We're changing the club. We've done away with the caddy system. Shifted. We've replaced it with a vocational program. The humiliation didn't break him. The kids still help out, but they spend half their shift behind Sterling for the next 9 holes. We're teaching them finance and management. They aren't just carrying bags. They're learning how to own the course. Elias made a silent bow. Elias felt a sense of completion. He looked at Sterling's back, the expensive fabric of his shirt, and the place of his greatest humiliation. Elias realized that the millionaire wasn't laughing because the idea was bad. That night, Elias went back to his own home. He was laughing because he couldn't imagine that a nobody could hold the key to large somebody problems. He sat on his back porch and pulled out the old notebook he had carried when he was 17. He didn't go home to eat. The pages were yellowed, straight to the public library. Was fading. He flipped. He sat at the back to the very last page, the one with the flickering screen, blank for 15 and opened his notebook. He took out a pen and wrote a few final lines. Apex flow. The millionaire laughed. He began to type. He laughed. His fingers flew across the keyboard, something you were born with, translating the logic in his head into lines. He didn't know that true power is something you build by lifting others. He wasn't just building a solution for Sterling. He didn't know that a boy with a bag could have a world in his head. He was building a system that would one day make Sterling's entire way of doing business by the sound of 1,000 doors opening for people who used to be told to stay outside. The library lights flickered. The caddy didn't just fix the shipping firm. The librarian, he fixed the kind woman who knew Elias by name. Elias walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. He looked up at the stars. You're going to be a success one day, the same stars that had watched him walk home in the dark after a long shift. Elias looked at the screen. He realized that his story wasn't about his own reflection, a tired boy. It was about the fact that no one's potential should ever be a joke. No, Elias said. He went inside. I'm going to be the person they never saw coming. The 3 years that followed the day at the golf course were not filled with cinematic montages or sudden windfalls of cash. The boy had proven everyone. They were filled with the smell of stale coffee, importantly, the hum of a cheap cooling that everyone could be right, and the constant dull they were given the exhaustion. Elias graduated from high school without a party or a celebration. While his classmates were picking out outfits for prom or talking about which state university they would attend, Elias was picking up double shifts at a local warehouse in a late night, gig cleaning floors at a diner. He didn't mind the work. In fact, he found a strange kind of peace in it. The warehouse was a living laboratory, or a driver sat idling for 2 hours because the paperwork hadn't been processed. Elias saw a line of code in his head. He saw the friction in the world. He realized that the great men like Mr. Sterling weren't actually geniuses. They were just people who had been lucky enough to get there first, and they were now too comfortable to see how broken their own systems were. His office was a corner of the kitchen table in the apartment he shared with his mother. She worked as a nurse's assistant, coming home with swollen ankles and a back that never stopped hurting. She would see him hunched over his laptop, a refurbished machine he'd bought for $80 from a pawn shop, and she would set a plate of food next to him without saying a word. She didn't understand what the lines of green text on the black screen meant, but she understood the look in her son's eyes. It was the same look her father had when he was trying to farm a patch of land that the rain had forgotten. It was the look of a man who refused to be defeated by the earth. You need to sleep, Elias, she would say softly, rubbing his shoulder. Just 1 more hour, Ma, he'd reply. I almost have the routing engine optimized. If I can get it to predict the traffic patterns in the industrial district, I can save a single truck for gallons of fuel a day. Just 1 truck. She would kiss the top of his head and go to bed, leaving him in the blue light of the monitor. The struggle wasn't just about time. It was about the isolation. Elias had friends, or at least he used to. There was a boy from the neighborhood, Leo, who used to play basketball with him. Leo would stop by the diner while Elias was mopping and lean against the counter. Man, come out with us, Leo would say, spinning a ball on his finger. Big T is having a party. Everyone's going to be there. You're becoming a ghost, Elias. You're working 3 jobs, and then you go home to play with a calculator. For what? So you can get rich. Look at us. We aren't those people. Just live a little. Elias would look at the soapy water in his bucket, and then at Leo. He didn't feel superior to Leo. If anything, he felt a pang of envy. It would be so easy to just go to the party. It would be so easy to accept that his life was meant to be lived in this 3-block radius. But then he would hear it. In the back of his mind, like a ghost in the room, he would hear Sterling's laughter. The caddy. The caddy is going to fix a shipping firm. That laugh was his battery. Every time he felt his eyelids getting heavy or his fingers cramping from typing, he would replay that sound. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the fact that a man who had everything thought that a boy who had nothing was a joke. By the 2nd year, Elias had a working prototype. He called it Apex Flow. It was a simple interface, but underneath, it was a beast. It used real-time data to solve the last-mile delivery problem. He began cold calling local businesses. He wasn't looking for millionaires yet. He was looking for the people who felt the sting of every lost dollar. He finally got a yes. From a man named Mr. Henderson, who ran a small fleet of 5 trucks delivering organic produce to local markets. Henderson was a blunt man with grease under his fingernails. "I don't trust computers, and I don't trust kids," Henderson said, leaning across a desk that smelled of old tobacco. "But my drivers are getting lost in the new construction zones, and I'm losing my shirt on spoiled kale. You say this thing can fix it? Give me 1 week," Elias said. "Don't pay me a dime. Just let me install the bridge on your dispatch computer. If your fuel costs don't drop by 10% in 7 days, I'll uninstall it and walk away." That week was the longest of Elias's life. He didn't sleep at all. He followed the trucks on his laptop from the warehouse, watching the little dots move across the map. When he saw a driver heading toward a closed road, his heart stopped till he saw the software automatically ping the driver's tablet and reroute him 3 minutes before the backup began. On the 8th day, Elias walked into Henderson's office. The old man didn't look up. He just tossed a printed spreadsheet across the desk. "Fuel costs are down 14%. Henderson grunted. "And the drivers aren't screaming at me when they get back to the yard." "How much?" Elias didn't ask for a lot of money. He asked for a testimonial. He asked for the right to use Henderson's data to prove his system worked. He was building a resume out of results, brick by brick. But the world has a way of testing you when you're on the rise. In the 3rd year, his mother got sick. It wasn't a movie sick where everything's dramatic. It was a slow, expensive kind of sick. The bills started piling up on the kitchen table, right next to his laptop. The diner cut his hours. The warehouse changed management and let go of all the part-time staff. Elias found himself standing in front of his laptop one night, his hand hovering over the sell button on a forum where people bought independent code. He could sell the core logic of Apex Flow for $5,000 right now. It would pay the rent. It would cover his mother's medication for 6 months. His hand trembled. He thought about the 3 years. He thought about the library books and the calloused feet. If he sold it now, it would be gone. Someone else would put their name on it. Someone else would build the empire, and he would just be a guy who almost made it. He closed the laptop. He didn't sell. Instead, he went to the diner and asked for the graveyard shift. The one nobody wanted because you had to clean the grease traps in the bathrooms. He worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Then he came home and worked on Apex Flow from 7 a.m. to noon. He was skin and bone. He was a shadow of the boy who had carried golf bags. But his mind was sharper than it had ever been. He started to realize that the logistics nightmare Sterling had talked about years ago was getting worse. The world was changing. People were ordering everything online. The old systems were cracking under the weight of the demand. Elias sat in his dark kitchen, looking at a news report on his phone. There was a photo of a massive line of ships waiting outside a port. In the corner of the photo, he saw a familiar face in the background of a press conference. It was Sterling. He looked older. He looked tired. He looked like a man who was losing a fight he didn't understand. Elias didn't laugh. He just opened his laptop and began to code. He wasn't the help anymore. He was the architect of the escape hatch. And he was almost ready to open the door. The world has a strange way of proving people right when they least expect it. For 3 years, Elias had been obsessed with friction, the tiny delays that slowed down the world. He had seen it in the warehouse, in the grocery store aisles, and on the shipping docks. But in the 4th year, the friction didn't just slow things down. It stopped the world entirely, a massive series of storms. Combined with a sudden labor strike at the nation's largest ports, created a bottleneck that the news began calling the Great Gridlock. It wasn't just about electronics anymore. It was about medicine, food, and the very things people needed to survive. On the television in the diner, where Elias still worked the early morning shift, he watched as news anchors stood in front of maps covered in red X marks. The old systems, the ones built by men like Sterling, were failing. They were built for a world that was predictable. This new world was anything but. Elias was sitting at the diner counter, a cup of black coffee steaming in front of him, when he saw a familiar face on the screen. It was an interview with Mr. Sterling. The millionaire looked haggard. His expensive suit seemed to hang off his frame, and the confidence that had once radiated from him like heat from a radiator was gone. He was explaining why his company's deliveries were 3 weeks behind. "The variables are too high," Sterling said into the microphone, looking defeated. "Between the weather and the port closures, our routing software simply can't find a path. We're looking at hundreds of millions in losses." Elias took a sip of his coffee. He didn't feel joy in Sterling's failure, but he felt a cold, sharp clarity. He knew that Apex Flow could solve it. While Sterling's engineers were trying to force a broken system to work, Elias had built a system that expected things to break. His code thrived on chaos. He went back to his apartment, the one that still smelled like his mother's peppermint tea and the old wood of his desk. He opened his laptop. For the last 6 months, he had been running shadow tests. He'd been feeding real-time global weather data and port status reports into his software, just to see what it would do while the rest of the world's logistics were showing red lines and error messages. Elias's screen was a beautiful, pulsing web of green. His software wasn't looking for the shortest route. It was looking for the resilient route. It was suggesting paths through smaller inland ports that the big companies ignored. It was calculating the exact hour a truck should leave to miss a storm surge. "It's ready," he whispered to the empty room. But having a solution and getting people to listen are two very different things. Elias spent the next 2 weeks in a different kind of war. He wasn't a caddy anymore, and he wasn't just a coder. He had to become a salesman. He didn't have a suit. He didn't have an office. He just had a used laptop and a phone with a cracked screen. He started calling every mid-sized shipping firm in the region. Most of them hung up on him. "I'm busy losing my company, kid. I don't have time for a sales pitch," one manager yelled before the line went dead. Elias didn't stop. He remembered the feeling of carrying that heavy golf bag. He remembered the burn in his legs. This was just another hill to climb. Finally, he got through to a woman named Mrs. Gable. She ran a regional medical supply company. Her situation was desperate. She had 3 trucks filled with life-saving equipment that were stuck somewhere in a 300-mile line of traffic, and her current dispatchers had no idea how to get them out. "I can't pay you up front," she told Elias over the phone, her voice shaking with stress. "If these supplies don't reach the hospitals by tomorrow morning, I won't have a company left to pay you with." "I don't want your money right now," Elias said, his voice calm and steady. "I want your data. Give me the GPS coordinates of your drivers and the destination list. I'll send the routes to their phones in 10 minutes. Elias worked through the night. He didn't just use his software. He lived inside it. He watched the weather satellites like a hawk. He found a gravel road that bypassed a flooded highway. He found a small ferry crossing that was still operational but wasn't on any commercial map. He sent the instructions to the drivers. One by one, the dots on his screen began to move. While the rest of the traffic on the coast stayed frozen in red, Mrs. Gable's 3 trucks were moving through the back roads like a needle through silk. At 4 a.m., Kay's phone buzzed. It was a text from Mrs. Gable. It was just a photo. It showed her trucks parked at the loading dock of a major hospital, the sun just beginning to peek over the horizon. The caption read, "They made it." "How did you do that?" Elias didn't reply. He just closed his laptop and leaned his head back against the wall. He felt a tear prick his eye, but he brushed it away. He wasn't done. Over the next month, word began to spread. In the world of logistics, news moves fast, especially when someone finds a way to move when everyone else is stuck. Mrs. Gable told a friend. That friend told a director at a national retail chain. Suddenly, Elias's phone wouldn't stop ringing. He had to move. He hired 2 guys he knew from the library, brilliant kids who had been overlooked by big tech firms because they didn't have fancy degrees. They worked out of Elias's living room, surrounded by pizza boxes and extra monitors. They weren't Apex Flow anymore. They were the Ghost Runners. That's what the drivers started calling them. When the world stopped, the Ghost Runners found a way. Elias was no longer the boy who was laughed at. He was now the CEO of a company that was quietly saving businesses from bankruptcy. He was making more money in a week than he used to make in a year at the golf course. He bought his mother a new bed, the kind that adjusted to help her backhand. He paid off her medical bills in one lump sum, but the biggest test was still coming. One afternoon, an email landed in his inbox. It wasn't from a small business or a medical supplier. It was from the corporate headquarters of Sterling Global Logistics. The subject line was simple: request for emergency consultation. Elias sat staring at the name Sterling for a long time. His heart wasn't racing this time. It wasn't full of anger. It was full of a strange, cold peace. He remembered the way Sterling had looked at him on the golf course, as if Elias were a part of the landscape. Like a tree or a bench, something that didn't have a brain or a soul. He realized that Sterling didn't know who he was emailing. He was just a drowning man reaching for a life raft. He didn't realize that the life raft was being held by the boy he had mocked. Elias looked at his team. They were working hard, their faces lit by the glow of their screens, building the future. He looked at the photo of his mother on his desk. Then he turned back to the screen. He didn't hit accept, not yet. He had a different plan. He wanted Sterling to see him not through an email, but face to face. He wanted to see if the millionaire still thought the world belonged only to men like him. "Tell them I'll meet," Elias said to his assistant. "But tell them the meeting won't be in their boardroom. Tell them the meeting will be at the Rolling Pines Country Club, at the 10th tee." The morning air at Rolling Pines was crisp, exactly as it had been years ago. The smell of freshly cut grass and expensive fertilizer hung heavy in the breeze. For most of the members, this was a place of peace. For Elias, it was the site of a ghost story. He stood near the 10th tee, the very spot where his life had changed. He wasn't wearing a white caddy vest today. He wore a simple, well-tailored dark suit knot, flashy, but the kind of clothes that whispered rather than screamed. He arrived early. He wanted to feel the ground under his feet. He watched a young boy, probably no older than 14, struggling with a heavy bag in the distance. Elias felt a sharp pang of recognition. He walked over to the kid, handed him a $100 bill, and told him to take the morning off. The boy's eyes went wide, but he didn't ask questions. He just disappeared toward the snack shack, leaving the bag behind. Elias waited. 10 minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up to the club's path. A man stepped out. It was Mr. Sterling. From a distance, he still looked like the powerful man he had always been. But as he walked closer, the cracks were visible. His gait was slower. He was looking at his phone with a frantic energy, his thumb scrolling rapidly. He looked like a man who was drowning in data he couldn't control. Behind him was a younger man in a sharp blue suit, an assistant or a vice. President carrying a leather briefcase, Sterling reached the 10th tee and looked around, annoyed. He didn't see a CEO, saw a young man standing by the bench. He looked right past Elias, scanning the area for someone older, someone who looked like a millionaire. "We're looking for the head of Apex Flow," Sterling's assistant said, checking his watch. "He said he'd meet us here." "Strange place for a business meeting, if you ask me." Elias turned around slowly. He let the silence hang for a moment, listening to the wind in the trees. "I'm the head of Apex Flow," Elias said. His voice was calm, devoid of the shaking nerves he'd had as a teenager. Sterling stopped. He squinted, looking at Elias's face. You could see the gears turning in his head. He recognized the eyes, the jawline, the way the young man stood. But his brain refused to connect the dots. It was impossible. "Do I know you?" Sterling asked, his voice cautious. "You told me to stick to the golf clubs once," Elias said softly. "You told me the world of business wasn't for kids like me. You laughed so hard, you had to lean on your driver." It didn't happen all at once. It was like watching a candle flicker out. The assistant looked back and forth between them, confused, but Sterling knew. The memory hit him like a physical blow. He remembered the caddy. He remembered the stupid suggestion about the Savannah port. "You," Sterling whispered. "The kid from the club." "My name is Elias," he replied. "And you asked for a meeting because your company is losing $4 million a week? You asked for a meeting because your ships are sitting in the harbor and your shareholders are ready to remove you. You didn't come here to talk to a caddy. You came here to talk to the only person who can save your legacy." Sterling looked like he wanted to get angry. For a second, that old arrogance flared up in his eyes. He opened his mouth to say something dismissive, to reclaim the high ground. But then his phone buzzed in his hand. He looked down at the screen, likely another notification of a lost contract or a delayed shipment. The fire in his eyes died out, replaced by a cold, hard desperation. "The world is different now, Elias," Sterling said, his voice gravelly. "It's not as simple as it used to be. Things are ... breaking." "The world isn't different," Elias countered. "It's just moving faster than you are. You built a kingdom on the idea that things would always stay the same. I built a system that knows things will always change. You didn't see me then because you didn't think I was a person. You saw a tool, and now you're realizing that the tools are the ones who actually understand how the machine works." The assistant stepped forward, trying to salvage the professional tone. "Look, Mr. Elias, we are prepared to offer a significant sum for a licensing agreement for your software. We want to integrate Apex Flow into the Sterling Global Network. We're talking about a deal that would set you up for life." Elias looked at the leather briefcase. Years ago, that briefcase would have looked like a chest of gold. Now it just looked like old skin. "I don't need to be set up for life," Elias said. "I'm already doing that. What I want to know is why I should help you. When I was 16, I gave you the answer for free. I tried to help you because I saw a problem and I knew how to fix it. You didn't just say no, you tried to humiliate me. You tried to make sure I knew my place. If I help you now, I'm just validating that you were right to wait until I had power to treat me with respect." Sterling sighed, a long whistling sound. He looked out over the fairway. "What do you want then? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was an arrogant fool who didn't see what was right in front of me. Is that what you need to hear?" "No," Elias said. "I don't need your apology. I need your company to change. I've looked at your employment records, Mr. Sterling. You pay your warehouse staff the bare minimum. You don't offer health benefits to your drivers. You treat the people at the bottom of your ladder the same way you treated me on this golf course, as if they are invisible." Elias took a step closer. The power in the air had shifted completely. He wasn't the boy looking up anymore. "I will save your company," Elias continued. "But I won't do it for a licensing fee. I want a 40% stake in Sterling Global. And I want a seat on the board with full veto power over labor relations. We're going to take the money we save using my software, and we're going to put it back into the people who actually move the boxes. We're going to build a scholarship fund for the kids in my neighborhood so they don't have to wait for a millionaire to stop laughing before they can start building." 40%. That's insane. That's a hostile takeover in all but name. Sterling held up a hand to silence his assistant. He looked at Elias really. Looked at him. He saw the intelligence. He saw the man he had accidentally created by being cruel. He was a force of nature. And if he said no, Sterling Global would be dead by the end of the quarter. "You're not just looking for a deal," Sterling said. "You're looking to rewrite the whole book." "The old book is burning, Mr. Sterling," Elias said, glancing at the 10th hole. "I'm just offering you a pen so you can help me write the next one. But make no mistake, I'm the one holding the paper." Sterling stood there for a long time. The wind ruffled his thin silver hair. He looked at the golf course, a place where he had always felt like a king, and realized it was just a patch of grass. Finally, he reached out his hand. Elias looked at the hand. He remembered the putters being tossed his way. He remembered the mockery. He waited just long enough to let Sterling feel the weight of his own history. Then, Elias reached out and shook it. It wasn't a handshake of friendship. It was a handshake of a new era. "Meeting at my office at 8 a.m. tomorrow," Elias said, pulling his hand away. "Bring the contracts. And don't be late. I don't work for you anymore." As Elias walked away, leaving the two men standing in the middle of the grass, he didn't feel a rush of anger or even a sense of triumph. He felt a deep, quiet calm. He walked past the 10th tee, past the clubhouse, and toward his car. He thought about his mother, who was currently sitting in a sunlit garden he had bought for her. He thought about the kids at the library. He realized that the millionaire's laughter hadn't been an obstacle at all. It had been the very thing that forced him to become someone who could never be laughed at again. The transition of power did not happen overnight, but it felt like a shift in the gravity of the city. Within 6 months of that meeting on the golf course, the Sterling Apex partnership had become the talk of the business world. But while the newspapers were focused on the stock prices and the revolutionary software, Elias was focused on the people. He moved his headquarters out of the glass towers and into a refurbished warehouse on the edge of the neighborhood where he had grown up. He wanted to be close to the ground, where the air smelled of exhaust and hard work, not silk and expensive cologne. Elias walked through the new dispatch center on a Tuesday morning. The room was humming with the sound of his software, but it didn't feel like a cold, robotic factory. He had designed the space with large windows and comfortable break areas. He had insisted that every driver had a high-quality tablet and that every warehouse worker had a chair that supported their back. It seemed like a small thing to a man like Sterling, but to the workers, it was a revolution. They weren't just units of labor anymore. They had names. Mr. Sterling visited the new headquarters once a month. He was no longer the chairman. He walked into Elias's office, looking around at the lack of mahogany and gold trim. "It's a bit loud in here, isn't it?" Sterling asked, taking a seat in a simple mesh chair. "It's the sound of things moving," Elias replied, without looking up from his screen. "We've cleared the backlog in Savannah. The trucks are moving at 98% efficiency. And more importantly, our turnover rate for employees has dropped to almost zero. People stay when they feel like they're part of the win, not just a tool for someone else's profit." Sterling nodded slowly. He looked humbler now. He had spent the last few months watching Elias dismantle the old cruel ways of the shipping business. He had watched Elias set up a community tech center down the street, where kids from the neighborhood could come after school to learn the same coding languages Elias had taught himself in the dark. "I saw the scholarship list this morning," Sterling said quietly. "There are 50 kids on there already. Full rides to engineering schools, no strings attached." "There are strings," Elias said, finally looking up. "The string is that they have to come back and mentor the next group. We aren't just giving them a way out. We're giving them a way to build something right here. I don't want the next genius to have to work as a caddy for 10 years before someone listens to him." Sterling looked down at his hands. "You still hold that against me, don't you?" "The golf course." Elias stood up and walked to the window. Below him, a fleet of trucks was pulling out of the yard, guided by the invisible hand of Apex Flow. "I don't hold it against you anymore. In a strange way, I have to thank you. If you had been kind to me that day, I might have just taken a small tip and gone home happy. I might have stayed a caddy for the rest of my life, hoping for a pat on the back. Your laughter was the first time I realized that I couldn't wait for permission to be great. I had to build my own world because the one you lived in didn't have a seat for me. The story of Elias didn't end with a big party or a trophy. He sat on the porch with her, watching the sunset. She wasn't wearing her nurse's uniform anymore. She was wearing a soft sweater, her hands relaxed in her lap. She looked younger than she had in years. "Are you happy, Elias?" she asked, her voice soft in the twilight. Elias thought about the thousands of people who now had health care because of his company. He thought about the kids at the tech center who were currently typing their first lines of code. He thought about the millionaire who had learned to be a student again. "I'm not just happy, Ma," Elias said, taking her hand. "I'm settled. I spent so long trying to prove everyone wrong. Now I'm finally just focused on doing what's right." In the distance, the city lights flickered on. Among them, the green lights of the Apex trucks moved steadily through the streets. They were moving medicine to hospitals, food to families, and hope to the neighborhoods that had been forgotten. The boy who was laughed at had become the man who kept the world moving. And as the moon rose over the city, the only sound was the quiet hum of a system that worked for everyone, not just the few. The lesson was simple. Carved into the hearts of everyone who worked at the warehouse, never judge a person by the bag they carry, for you never know the world they are building inside their head. Elias had proven that the loudest laugh doesn't win the race. The steadiest heart does. 10 years had passed since the day at the golf course, and the name Apex Flow was no longer just a company name. It had become a symbol of a new way to live. Elias was now 33 years old. He still didn't wear gold watches or drive flashy cars. If you saw him walking down the street in his neighborhood, you'd think he was just another neighbor, perhaps a teacher or a local shop owner. He liked it that way. He didn't want to be a monument. He wanted to be a bridge. One morning, Elias decided to go for a drive. He didn't go to the Highrise offices or the shipping docks. He drove back to the old public library where it had all started. He stood outside for a moment, looking at the brick building. It looked smaller than he remembered. He walked inside, and the smell of old paper and floor wax hit him like a physical memory. He walked to the back corner, to the very desk where he had spent those long nights coding under the flickering lights. A young girl, maybe 14, was sitting there now. She had 3 heavy books stacked next to her and was typing furiously on a tablet. Elias stood back, watching her. He saw the way her brow furrowed in concentration. He saw the way she bit her lip when she hit a snag in her logic. It was like looking at a ghost of himself. "The syntax for that loop is a bit tricky," Elias said softly, stepping closer. "If you try to nest the variables too deep, the memory will lag." The girl looked up startled. She didn't know who he was. To her, he was just a guy in a plain jacket. "I know," she said, a bit of fire in her eyes. "But if I don't nest them, I can't get the real-time weather data to sync with the transit times. I'm trying to build a way for the local food pantry to know when the grocery store is about to throw out milk so they can pick it up before it spoils." Elias felt a lump in his throat. He didn't tell her his name. He didn't tell her he owned the company that handled 30% of the country's freight. He just pulled up a chair. "Show me your logic," he said. For the next 2 hours, the millionaire and the student sat in the back of the library, working through lines of code. He didn't do the work for her. He asked her questions that led her to the answers. He watched her face light up when the code finally ran without an error. "You're really good at this," the girl said, packing up her things as the library began to close. "Are you a teacher?" "I'm a student," Elias replied with a smile. "Just a bit further along in the book than you are." As he walked out of the library, he saw a familiar car parked at the curb. It was a modest sedan, and inside was Mr. Sterling. Sterling didn't drive a limousine anymore. Since retiring, he had joined the board of Elias's scholarship foundation. He spent his days visiting high schools, talking to kids about the mistakes he had made. "You're late for the board meeting," Sterling said, though there was no edge in his voice. He sounded like a grandfather now, mellowed by time and the realization that his old life had been very lonely. "I got caught up in some important research," Elias said. Climbing into the passenger seat, they drove through the city together. They passed the new community center, which was buzzing with activity. They passed a group of young men and women in Apex Flow uniforms, laughing as they walked to lunch. These were the people who used to be invisible to men like Sterling. Now, they were the backbone of the local economy. "Do you ever think about that day?" Sterling asked as they stopped at a red light. "The day I laughed." Elias looked out the window. "I think about it every time I see someone look down on another person. I think about how much potential is lost in the world simply because someone thinks they are better than someone else." "I used to think that the world was a ladder," Sterling said, his voice quiet. "I thought you had to step on people to get to the top. But you showed me that the world is more like a web. If you pull too hard on one string, the whole thing breaks. You have to strengthen the whole web if you want it to hold anything of value." They arrived at the community center for the board meeting. The room was filled with local leaders, parents, and former caddies who were now logistics managers. When Elias walked into the room, nobody bowed or went silent. They just nodded and said, "Hey, Elias." During the meeting, they discussed the expansion of the Apex Neighborhood Grant. They weren't just funding tech anymore. They were funding community gardens, small bakeries, and local health clinics. Elias listened more than he talked. He wanted the community to lead itself. After the meeting, a man approached Elias. He was in his 50s, with tired eyes, but a wide smile. He was the manager of the very golf course where Elias used to work. "Elias," the man said, shaking his hand, "I just wanted to tell you, we're changing the club. We've done away with the caddy system. We've replaced it with a vocational program. The kids still help out, but they spend half their shift in a classroom we built in the clubhouse. We're teaching them finance and management. They aren't just carrying bags. They're learning how to own the course one day." Elias felt a sense of completion he couldn't describe. The cycle had been broken. The place of his greatest humiliation had become a place of education. That night, Elias went back to his own home, a small, comfortable house with a large garden. He sat on his back porch and pulled out the old notebook he had carried when he was 17. The pages were yellowed and the ink was fading. He flipped to the very last page, which had been blank for 15 years. He took out a pen and wrote a few final lines. The millionaire laughed at first. He laughed because he thought power was something you were born with or something you took. He didn't know that true power is something you build by lifting others. He didn't know that a boy with a bag could have a world in his head. Today the laughter is gone, replaced by the sound of 1,000 doors opening for people who used to be told to stay outside. The caddy didn't just fix the shipping firm. He fixed the way we see each other. Elias closed the notebook. He looked up at the stars, the same stars that had watched him walk home in the dark after a long shift at the club. He realized that his story wasn't about being a millionaire. It was about the fact that no one's potential should ever be a joke. He went inside. The boy had proven everyone wrong, but more importantly, he had proven that everyone could be right, if only they were given the chance.